Hey y'all, what's going on? This is Jackie Marie, and I am making a video about the transitional care unit. So I had received a request from one of the viewers asking to make a video about the transitional care unit, and I had never heard of that type of unit. So I was like, "You mean hospice?" And they were like, "No." So it's the initials are TCU. So I googled it, and transitional care unit. So then I did some research and I was like, okay, it kind of looks like rehab. So it kind of looked like a sniff or type situation. And I was like, well, I never did a sniff, and a sniff is a skilled nursing facility, and it's just like where people go when they need a little bit more time in the hospital. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. It's where people go when they don't need to be in the hospital anymore, but they're not ready to go home. And so I was like, well, I never worked, you know, at a SNF or anything like that. So then I was like, well, let me ask my mom. So I asked my mom because my mom's a nurse and she was a traveling nurse. And I said, have you ever worked at a hospital that had a transitional care unit? And she was like rehab? I was like, yeah. And she was like, yeah. And then she told me she had been floated to one. So I was like, oh, okay. So, cause I never heard of it. Now, to my credit, I only worked at two hospitals in my life. So what I know is what I know mainly from here, um, this hospital. So, but my mom, she knew, and then so I did some research, and then I was like, okay, yeah, it is, cause everything is pointing to it's like a rehab. It's like a, and I was like, well, and then I remembered that I did work in the rehab department. I did float over there a few times. Golly, probably between 5 and 10 times I worked over there. So I was like, oh my God, I forgot all about that. That I worked in the rehab. So basically, a transitional care unit. What they do is like a short-term stay, and the goal is just to transition the people from the hospital um, to to home, to get them, or get them back to where they need to be, because everybody don't live at home. Some people live in a nursing home or a long-term care facility, or um, assisted living facility. So not everyone lives at home, but they don't need to be in the hospital, but they're not good to go home yet. They still got things that need to be done. So that's where they go, and they'll be there for like 2 weeks. And while they're there, and it depends on why they're in the hospital and what they're there for. So like the rehab that we had, um, it was its own. It was in the hospital, but it wasn't a part of the hospital. It was owned by the hospital, but it was like its own separate facility, if that makes sense. So it was literally next to the ICU. I don't know how I forgot this. I don't know how I forgot I worked over there. And I don't know how I forgot that I worked over there. So it was next to the ICU, the one I worked on, but it was its own facility. So like they had, now the nurses worked for the hospital, but because it was owned by the hospital, but it was his own facility, had his own NPI number and all that good stuff. So when we would discharge a patient, so like let's say we had to admit a patient, let's say a patient was going to leave the ICU and go over there, we would have to discharge the patient. So no matter where the patient was in the hospital, if they were going to go to that rehab, they needed to be discharged from the hospital, and then admitted to that facility because it was his own facility. Same thing with the hospice. The hospice was a different company. It was a company that was just located in the hospital. So when a person was
going to go to hospice, we would discharge them from the hospital, and then they will admit them to their facility. And all we did was just take them upstairs. And the rehab was literally right next to it. So it was a different facility. Now, it seems like some of these transitional care units are in the hospital. I don't know if they are a part of the hospital, so if they would just be transferred from, uh, like if they were on the med surge, be transferred from med surge to the TCU, or how it works. I don't know. Like I said, I never heard of it, but I know at our hospital it was a separate facility, even though it was owned by the hospital. And one of the things they do is they do physical therapy. They would do occupational therapy. And occupational therapy is like household tasks, hobbies, social situations, work, school. So they would get people, they would do therapy with them to get them back to what they were doing. Because if they lived in an um, assisted living facility, there were a lot of things they can do on their own. But because of whatever reason they're there, they can't do it. So they got to work with them to get them back to what they were able to do, if that makes sense. So if they were able to live in a little apartment type, some I mean, they're like the assisted living facilities are like little apartments. If they were able to live in their own, their little apartments and live on their own, even though they're in the building and there were people there, like to assist them, but they were independent, they need to be able to get back to do that. You can't send somebody home from the hospital and they don't know how to, they can't take care of themselves. You got to get them back. So that's the whole point of something like that. And so they would do physical therapy with them, occupational therapy, speech therapy. Um, you as a secretary, and I'm just going off what I remember from working in the rehab, the patients more than likely, so like when you see the patients aren't going to be in gowns. They're not in gowns. They're in their regular clothes. They have a room. I don't think I think all the rooms were private. I don't think any of the rooms were semi-private. The rooms were private, and even though I'm pretty sure some can be semi-private, I don't know why they would, but they would be uh, more than likely private. The people wear their own clothes because you want them to get back to where they were. They're not in the hospital, and because they're not. So they're not. They're still in the hospital, but they're not in the hospital. So they're not in the hospital gown. They're in their regular clothes, um, dress, shoes, pants, shirt, dresses, whatever, moving around. If they want to eat in the dining room, they can eat in the dining room because because the rehab had a dining room. They had a dining room. It had like puzzles and all that stuff. When I tell you that they had those people's therapy scheduled out, because like whatever the reason was that they were there, therapy, depending on the therapy, they were there for like 2 hours. They had a calendar, and like on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they had the room number, and then they had 2 hours speech therapy, and then like Monday from 10 to 12 speech therapy, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They had that shit laid out for these people because they want to get them out of there. You don't want them to be here forever. Do you understand? You want to get them better so they can get out of there. But they had a dining room. They had like a little game room. Cause I went a few times when I the first few times I floated over there, I was still working on the med surge floor, and so I sat over there in their like dining area because they weren't there. It's like I don't know where the people were. They was in their room or whatever. Well, and mainly, I worked the weekends, so it was really no one there. But then when I went to the ICU, because the ICU, when I transferred to the ICU, when I would float over there, I would just go back to our unit because it was right there. But it's set up. They had they physical therapy. section. You can see them walking in the hallway, and physical therapy will be there. You will see them. Mainly, you see the case managers there because the whole point is to coordinate everything. Case management was always there because you got all these people that got admitted. You got to get everything situated because even though let's say they're going back home, so they're well enough to go back home, but they still need, I don't know, a cane or whatever. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like they can go home, but they still need a cane or some kind of equipment. So case management is involved the entire time. That's more likely who you're gonna see the most is case management, physical therapy. I mean, you see the nurses. I really didn't interact with them. I mainly interacted with the charge nurse because the charge nurse sat right next to me. But when I sat on the one side, because it was two sides, but I always sat on the one because that's the way everyone came. When people would come in to the unit, they would always go left, so I always sat at that one. But it was two sides to it. And their hours were different. So like the hospital is 24 hours, but you have like visiting hours. But like when I would leave, like at 7, when change the shift at 7 o'clock, when I would leave because they were right next to the ICU, and I'm standing there at the elevator, they were already, lights were off on that unit at 7 o'clock in the evening because they got to get in the bed because they gotta get up in the morning and do all this physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, depending on what they were there for. So them lights were off. The schedule was different as far as uh, the secretaries, the nurses. Let's see if I remember. I think the nurses' schedule was the same as the hospital, which was the 12-hour shifts, the 7 to 7. But the secretaries had different schedules. The secretary, I think the morning one came in at like 5:30 to like 2, and then it would be like 2 to whenever, 2 to what, 11, and then I don't think they had one at night. So I think they just had the day shift and the night shift. Let's see, so 5 to like 2, 2 to whatever. I want to say they had 3. It was some kind of way they overlapped. I don't think they did 12-hour shifts. So when I would do it on the weekends. So I would do the 7 to 7 because that was the day they didn't have any secretary at all. Because I want to say that some days they had the day shift, the morning one, but not the evening. So, but when I always did the weekend. So I did like Sundays, and I would just do my 7 to 7. I would leave. I'm like, okay, this y'all gonna have to figure out the rest. Y'all got a charge nurse, and they did take over because when that part of the hospital was built, there were technically 2 ICUs built. So it was the one that I work on, and then there was one above us. But when they opened it, they didn't have enough patients, so they closed it. So it was like a overflow, but it was never we never used it as an overflow, and we just always used ours because we got them in, got them out, so we never really had an issue. And then they went to our sister floor, so we never really used it. And then, but the rehab, they needed it because they had a lot of people, so they took over that. So that was one of the things I had to deal with is running both floors because the one was on one level and the other one was upstairs because it was right above the ICU. So I did have to do that. Go up there and check those charts because doctors write orders in charts. They may not necessarily put them in the computer, so I did have to do that. But mainly, I did it. I just did it on the weekends, and it was quieter on the weekends. Dietary bring the trays because it was treated like a hospital. So we still had that. They would still get stuff from the pharmacy. Dietary would still bring stuff up. If they needed to go down for a procedure, they would. But it was just run different. It was like a facility within a facility. So it was separate but not, because it was part of the hospital. Um, but like I said, I mainly worked there during the weekends because I got pulled over there when they didn't have anyone. Because like I said, the hours were different. So I don't know what the hours would be at other facilities. Um, my mom, my mom said, because I want to say she got floated down there once, and she was like, "What's going on?" Because she was like, "You mean like rehab?" I was like, "Yeah, I guess that's what it is." But it's more like a rehab facility, and you just do what you do on a normal case. Now, like in our case, we had to admit the patient because they, like when I told you that we would discharge them from the hospital and then they would admit them. That's what we had to do. We had to admit them. We had to admit them like just like it was a different facility, because that's what it was. They would be admitted to that facility like they were going to a SNF or a nursing home or a long-term care. We discharged them even though it was the same building, and we would just admit them, and it was a process. It was the same way with it was the same way with hospice. And then mother baby was weird. um Well, the thing with, because when labor and delivery, you had to transfer them, but with labor and delivery, you had to transfer the mother and then you had to transfer the baby because they're two separate people. So that was a little something something. But yeah, that was one of those things. But yeah, it's weird to transfer somebody within the hospital. That I mean to discharge a patient, but they're still there physically in the hospital. That's kind of weird. But that's what it was. It was just basically one of those units. Now, like I said, I don't know how, um, if they are a part of the hospital setting. So like if they're treated like an ICU, or are they treated like how our hospice is treated. I don't know, because I had never heard of it. I thought it was hospice. But I don't, there are so many units. Like you don't, just as a secretary, and just by everyone asking all these questions like about the different units, there are so many units that I just never even would have thought about. You know what I'm saying? Like I would have never thought that there's so many different specialties. But yeah, it's mainly because everything I was looking at when I was looking it up, it kept kind of referring it to like a sniff. So yeah, I mean, will you have patients on the lights? Yeah, you don't have patients on the lights, but because every patient is not able-bodied. That makes sense, because it just all depends on why they're there. Some patients got neural issues, and those are the ones who might need occupational therapy. Some just had like orthopedic issues. Like my mom, I want to say my mom was in one, because she had knee surgery. She's a nurse and she had knee surgery, and my mama is hard headed. And she don't listen, so they had to put her. Yeah, because me and my sister was like, look, because she had three. She had three knee surgery. But my mom is one of those. She can't do anesthesia because she will come up fighting. And like, what's the whole point? So fighting meaning she kicking, she scratching. You literally just had knee surgery and you kicking. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what the anesthesia does to her. And so it was messing her up. So they was like, well, it was messing her knee up. Like that was the whole point. And so she went to rehab just to after she had it done, she went to rehab so they can keep an eye on it and make sure she's doing what she was supposed to do as far as getting that knee better and being able to walk on it and things like that. And my mom was in something like that. She had a little room, and it was, I want to say it was like it was like, because there were people who lived there. They lived there, and then because we used to send information there, because like we would transfer patients there from the ICU or from med surg. They would go back. They would go to that facility. So I knew exactly where it was, and but my mom had her own little room, and they had a dining room, and they had physical therapy, and but there were people who actually lived there as well. It was like I guess it was like a long-term care slash type thing, and they had a nurse's station and everything. I mean, but some people were just there for the short term, and my mom was one of them. But so it's just one of those things, and yeah, and I want to say those secretaries did the same type of hours. They did, in the morning and then in the evening. It was run like a separate facility, just like the rehab that we have at the hospital. So basically, you're just gonna just admit the patient. You're gonna do everything. You're gonna do everything that you do as a secretary. You're gonna admit the patient. Um, you like they will order their diets, and but dietary will bring it up. Bring it up to them. But you're not dealing with them like you would on the main floors. I mean, you are, but you're not. If there are consults, yeah, you would call in the consults. If the doctor came around and put in orders, you would put the orders in. I don't know. I don't remember too many consults, because once they get there, because the rehab facility had its own doctor. So remember I was telling you about how there was an overflow and they took over our upstairs ICU. Well, the doctor that left, because there was only one doctor and he saw all the patients there. Well, he left. Something happened. I don't know. And so they got a new doctor, and the new doctor was like, "We're gonna go admit this many patients a week." So it like cut it down, because that hospital, because our hospital was making all kinds of money from that facility, because all these people, physical therapy, because it's rehab, it's different kind of money, from Medicare. And so he cut it down, like only what I think 7 admissions a week or something. It was something like that. But I mean, I ain't mad at him. I ain't mad at him because they had the staffing. They didn't have the staffing, because like they didn't pull nurses. They didn't pull nurses from like, well, let me rephrase that. They did pull nurses. Um, where did they pull the nurses from? And the nurses didn't like it. I want to say they must have pulled the nurses from the ICU. Did they pull our nurses? I can't remember where they pulled the nurses from. They tried not to pull nurses over there, because it's a different type, and they very seldom pull secretaries over there. I know I went over there, and their secretaries never really went anywhere, because I don't even know who their secretaries were, because I never saw them, and I don't think their secretaries ever floated. Mm-hmm. I couldn't tell you one secretary over there. And I knew all the secretaries. And then the nurses very seldom. They they will pull them, but not really, because it's just a different type. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're all the same nurses, but they're not. If that makes sense. If that makes sense. And like, yeah, the secretaries that floated, I think I was the only one that really went over there, because I know everything. And yeah, I probably floated over there about 5-10 times. I knew the unit. It was mainly the weekends, and then sometimes I would represent, and I would be over there the on the rehab floor, and then our ICU was right there, and then I go over there and take care of them, because they would get an admission. And now they ain't got that, because sometimes we will be full, and they will pull me, because the rehab would need me more. but I would still go there and represent, handle my peoples, take care of them. Because they're like, I'm like right there. How come, I'm gonna take care of my people. So, but yeah, it's just a quieter floor because the people are there for rehab. So, they might be in their rooms doing rehab with the therapist. They could be in the dining area, depending on what they're learning, like occupational, because they had like a lot of puzzles and things like that. So they could have been, working with people on their mobility. It was just it's a nicer, cleaner facility. But I guess like when I did it like on Sundays, because it was quiet. Like they're not really doing physical therapies on a Sunday. You know what I'm saying? They gonna let the people rest because they gonna work them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I did do some discharges now. I did do some discharges, not a lot, but I did do discharges. And you just discharge them home. When I say you gonna work with case management a lot, you gonna work with case management a lot. Okay? When I tell you that, I want you to understand it because the doctor has the final say, and I talked about this in another video. The floor when it comes to like discharges, there are different. There are like hierarchies with the discharges. So the main doctor, because like that rehab, it was only one doctor. He was the main doctor. He admitted he discharged. But the case management was the one to me that it seemed like gave the green light for the people to be discharged. Okay, um, you know, it looks like everything is good. If they need equipment, we set up. If they need to go back to a long-term care facility, they set it up. Everything is good, and then the doctor would discharge. Whereas, like in ICU, the intensivist would discharge. Depending on why the patient was there. The and not the doctor on the. Do you understand? Like the doctor, that's the attending doctor, would get the final, but it was really based off if the intensivist said they can go. Do you understand? Same thing in cardiology. They can be on that telemetry floor. Yes, they have an attending doctor, but they ain't going nowhere until their cardiologist say they can go. If that makes sense. So there are hierarchies. That's one of the things you'll notice on different units when you float, that there are hierarchies. That yes, the attending doctor has the final say, and they'll write that discharge order, but that doctor is going to go off of that specialist, depending on what floor they're on. But yeah, the case management is very involved. Physical therapy is very involved. If you want to know if you got physical therapy, you want to know where they hang out at. That's where they hang out at. They in the rehab. That's where they are. And I knew, like I knew the rehab because I would see them on the med surge floor. I would see them because they would come to the med surge floor. They be looking for the nurse so they can get if it's okay to do therapy with the patient. And then of course on ortho, they're over there. But they were mainly over there in the rehab. That's where they were. So like if anytime we were looking for them, so like let's say I was on the floor, see me just knowing stuff. If we were waiting on rehab, so like let's say I was on the med surge floor, and it was like, so and so got an order for physical therapy, but they haven't been around. I would get on that phone and call right over there to that rehab because that's where they are. If that makes sense. Because I know that's where they are. They're gonna be in that rehab because they're gonna go there first because they want to get those people, get them up so they can get them out. If that makes sense. So yeah, so that's where rehab is. That's physical therapy. That's where they are. But like I said, you're gonna interact more with with the case management, and you're gonna see physical therapy more. They might not do too much talking to you because the nurses are there. Like you didn't even really hear me say anything about the nurses, have you? Because the nurses, I mean, they just monitoring. They're just monitoring. I mean, are they passing meds? Yeah, but they, physical therapy is doing the thing, and then they're just, they're monitoring. So they're not gonna ask you for too much. I mean, did I see the therapist? I mean, not therapist, the nurses. Yeah, I saw them, but they were mainly in the room charting and looking at stuff, and that I never really interacted with the nurses. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. That's one thing I can say. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. Like I said, I interacted more with the charge nurse, and that's because she sat next to me, and that's because their system was a little different. I mean, we use the same system, but just like the admitting and admitting the patients, that was a different thing because we had to wait for it because the people you know how it is okay, let's say a patient is discharged and the nurse is like, oh, don't take them out the computer yet, I gotta put my notes in, and so then you don't take them out, you don't discharge them, but then if we don't discharge them, how can rehab admit them? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, they can't admit them. So it was dealing with that and having to call and be like, can you discharge so I can pull them over because it's not a transfer. See, if it was a transfer, I could just pull them over, but it wasn't because they need to be admitted. That makes sense. So, like I said, I don't know how it is on other floors if they're discharged and then admitted, or if they just transferred over. But yeah, because that's one of the things right there. Nurses saying don't discharge. Like, I put my note in, and you want your nurse to be able to put their note in because then they have to go searching and all that stuff. I remember this one nurse when I was on the med surge. She be like, don't discharge me. I gotta put my note in. It'd be an hour later. I finally discharged him. And then she come ranting and raving. I'm like, lady, it's been an hour. Okay, you had an hour to put your notes in. Don't. I mean, she be mad because I took them out. Like, literally, as soon as I take them out, that's when she gonna put a note in. Like, that was our struggle. That was our beef. Okay, she did not like me, and I didn't care for her because that was always she used to always she did not like me because she didn't want me to take them out because they would get a patient. That's all that was. You know. So that's what they use when they don't want to get a patient. They tell you don't take them out because they got to put their note in. But it's an hour later, please. Ooh, she be mad. But yeah, it's just they have a doctor. Transitional care units have an on-site doctor. It was one doctor that was on that floor. He was the only doctor though. Well, you know what? One of them, I don't know if it was the first one that had like I don't know what he had, a partner, or maybe it was two of them. It was like a main doctor and a backup doctor. I don't know. Or if it was when they got the second doctor, if he had like a backup doctor. I can't remember. But I do vaguely remember somebody had like a backup doctor. But yeah, I was like, when she asked this question, I was like, I ain't never did know. I said, I think that's like a sniff. I ain't never worked at a sniff, and I don't know how I forgot that I worked at the rehab. I don't know how. I literally worked every unit in that hospital except labor and delivery and hospice. And the reason why I never worked hospice is because hospice was its own facility. It was like a hospice that's like they got locations by all the hospitals, if that makes sense. So they got physical locations. Some are within the other hospitals, and then they have their own facility, if that makes sense. Um, but it's like a chain, a franchise. I don't know what the word is, but that's what the hospice was. So they had their own staff. I don't think nurses got floated over there. but like got pulled to go work over there. I never worked over there, so I never did hospice because I want to say they had their own system because it was like a different facility. They just rented, the floor, the unit. But the rehab was a part of it. It belonged to the hospital. We used the same system. It was just it just had its own number. But yeah, I completely forgot. Oh, so yeah, I never worked on hospice and I never did labor and delivery. Literally, those are the only two units I never worked on. I worked on mother baby, PICU, peds, ICU, med surge, ortho. This one floor, my mama said, because my mama used to work there. She said it smelled like pee. She like, that's the urology floor. I'm like, mama, they didn't have a urology floor. She like, yes, they did because it smelled like pee. And she swore me down. It was the urology floor. But the oncology, ICU, cardiovascular, telemetry, every floor except hospice and labor and delivery. So yeah, and like I never did like OR or anything, but yeah, I worked a lot of places, but I had never heard of a transitional care unit. I thought it was hospice when she asked that question. But yeah, I learned something new every day. It just slipped my mind. I never even thought about rehab. Never even thought about it. But I hope I answered your question. And if you got any comments, you can put them below. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.